Good morning, everyone. I'm waiting for the other stream to get going. I'll get started. Well, welcome. Glad you could join us today. We're in 2 Samuel 20, and in 2 Samuel 20, David returns to Jerusalem after being chased out by his son Absalom, who then briefly took over the throne. And chapter 20 is the last chapter of this major section of 2 Samuel, and that goes from chapter 9 to chapter 20. And then the rest of the book, chapters 21 to 24, are an appendix that is called by one person a highly reflective theological interpretation of David's whole career that gives us a sketch of the messianic hope. My other stream is having problems. Well, in chapters 9 to 20, David went from showing a loyal love, Chesed, to Saul's grandson, Mephibosheth, to fighting with the Ammonites because they offended him, to committing adultery with Bathsheba, and then murdering her husband when she became pregnant. And since that was evil in God's eyes, who knew that adultery and murder were evil in God's eyes? But since that was evil, uh, in God's opinion, God had to punish David for his sin. God cannot allow the king of Israel to get away with adultery and murder. And so God said, well, I'm going to raise up evil against you from your own household. And consequently, one son raped one of David's daughters. Another son murdered the first son because of the rape, and then went into exile. And after returning from exile, he conspired to overthrow David and take over his throne. So, pretty bad punishment for David. But even though God was punishing David, he was still with him through all of it. Plus, David was a skillful leader and king, and so the rebellious son was defeated. And because David had a rebellious commander in charge of the army, the son was killed, despite David's instructions to treat him gently. Well, then David negotiated with the people to be reinstalled as king, and he's returning to Jerusalem. And things were probably not as glorious from a human perspective as they were before, but God has a chastened king leading his people, and that was a better situation from God's perspective. Now, none of us are likely to become king of Israel anytime soon, but we know we might just sin and have to suffer God's discipline. And when that happens, we need to make our way back into fellowship with God and with others, people we may have hurt with our sin. So we might commit adultery and end up divorced, or we might have to reconcile with our spouse, and that will take a toll on our family and other relationships. We might make poor financial decisions and end up perpetually broke or in bankruptcy. We might get a DUI and lose our driver's license for a while. We might have had a thing with someone years ago, and then suddenly a child appears that we didn't know we had. Theoretically, we might have had raging political arguments with someone, and the relationship with them is now damaged. Or we might have had disagreements about how to approach COVID-19 pandemic, and relationships are damaged because of that. And we can probably think of other scenarios. Hopefully, there's no murder involved. And what David experiences here can give us some guidance on how we can get back into fellowship with God and others and what kind of obstacles might be in our way. Well, wouldn't you know it, on the way back to Jerusalem, David faces opposition. And it says in verses 1 to 2, now a worthless man happened to be there, whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjaminite. And he blew the trumpet and said, "We have no share in David, nor do we have an inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, Israel." So all the men of Israel withdrew from following David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah remained loyal to their king from the Jordan even to Jerusalem. And so Sheba is a Benjaminite, so he's from the house of Saul, uh, at least the same tribe, and he doesn't want unity between Israel and Judah. And the writer says he's a worthless man, and that could be translated as a wicked man or a good for nothing man. If you are opposing God's anointed and his return to the throne, well, you're by definition worthless, wicked, and good for nothing. But nevertheless, he gets the men of Israel to withdraw from following David and follow him instead. But the men of Judah stay loyal to David, as you might expect, because David is from the tribe of Judah. And so when we are trying to come back from a fall of some sort, we may run into opposition for our return. And of course, we also have our perpetual enemy who is always prowling around looking for someone he might devour. So it might take some backbone on our part and some persistence to make it back. Well, then, when we're returning from discipline, we may have to put aside certain behaviors and maybe even certain people in obedience to God's commands. And that's in verse 3. And it says, then David came to his house in Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 women, the concubines whom he had left behind, to take care of the house, and put them in custody, and provided them with food, but did not have relations with them. So they were locked up until the day of their death, living as widows. So back in chapter 15, when David was fleeing Jerusalem and Absalom, he had left these 10 concubines behind to take care of his house. Well, on the advice of Ahithophel, Absalom slept with them all right out in public. Well, what's David to do now? In Deuteronomy 24, it says that if a woman has one husband and then another, she cannot go back to the first husband. And so David seems to be guided by the law here when he puts them up somewhere and provides for them, but he doesn't have relations with them ever again. And so consequently, they live as widows for the rest of their lives. And that's pretty rough for them because they had no choice at all in what happened. But it's possible that David's temporary exile here may have driven him back to God. Having many concubines was the practice of other nations, and it wasn't a good practice. The people of Israel, especially the king, were not supposed to do that kind of thing. And so now he looks like he's willing to give it up, especially since these concubines are off limits now according to the law. And so when we suffer discipline for something that we do, we will have to set aside certain behaviors and perhaps even certain people. We'll have to give up our adulterous relationships and the other person. We'll have to give up poor spending habits and perhaps people who lead us to spend frivolously. We'll have to give up drinking alcohol if we can't control ourselves, and maybe we'll go to AA or some other support group, but we certainly won't be driving after drinking. We'll treat the unexpected child who shows up well, and then we'll have to do the hard work with our own family. And we'll learn how to respect other people and their views on politics and things like COVID 19. We might have to agree to disagree with them if we can't figure out how to discuss things without having raging disagreements. And one of the purposes of discipline is to get us to change our ways. When we discipline our children, hopefully it's for their good and not for us. It's very easy to discipline kids because their behavior embarrasses us in public. And when we do that, the discipline is not really beneficial or productive. And when God disciplines us, it's always for our own good. It says in Hebrews 12:5-6, my son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are punished by him. For whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he punishes every son he accepts. And that Hebrews passage is quoting Proverbs 3:11, and the Hebrew passage goes on to say that God disciplines us for our good so that we may share in his holiness. And so when we do wrong and are being disciplined, we should be thankful that God is treating us as his children. Not easy to do. When we return from God's discipline, we should look for behaviors and people that we need to put aside in obedience to God's commands. Now, when we're trying to address problems in our lives, we might end up relying on the wrong people for the wrong reasons, and then we might have to send other people to do the job. And then the other people may be slighted by our decision, and they may end up taking actions that we don't like. And this is what happens in verses 4-9. Now the king said to Amasa, summon the men of Judah for me within 3 days, and be present here yourself. So Amasa went to summon the men of Judah, but he was delayed longer than the set time which he had designated for him. And David said to Abishai, now Sheba the son of Bichri will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your Lord's servants and pursue him, so that he does not find for himself fortified cities and escape from our sight. So Joab's men went out after him, along with the Kerethites, the Pelethites, and all the warriors, and they left Jerusalem to pursue Sheba the son of Bichri. When they were at the large stone, which is in Gibeon, Amasa came to meet them. Now Joab was dressed in his military attire, and over it he had a belt with a sword in its sheath strapped on his waist. And as he went forward, it fell out. And Joab said to Amasa, is it going well for you, my brother? And Joab took hold of Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. So David had recently made Amasa the commander of his army. And before that, Joab was the commander. But then Joab had killed Absalom despite David's command to treat him gently. And so David's no doubt mad at Joab and tired of his disobedience and insubordination. But another part why David made Amasa commander of the army was to win over the people's support. Amasa had been commander of Absalom's army during the revolt. And so it was kind of an expedient thing for David to do to try to get back on the throne in Jerusalem. Well, Amasa is taking too long, and David fears the kingdom is dangerously fragile. And that's the problem of putting people in leadership for political reasons. They may not be the best people for the job. And so David sends Abishai after Sheba. And Abishai is Joab's brother, and they both are David's nephews. And Amasa is also a nephew to David from another sister, I think, or maybe a brother. And so Amasa is first cousin to Joab and Abishai. So it's kind of all in the family here. Well, we're left hanging here a little bit, so let's move on to the next part. Now, Joab, he's a ruthless person, and apparently not pleased that David has made Amasa commander of his army. And so this is what happens when you put the wrong people in charge and allow them to get away with bad behaviors. And that's verses 10 to 12. It says, but Amasa was not on guard against the sword which was in Joab's hand. So he struck him in the belly with it, and it spilled out his intestines on the ground, and did not strike him again, and he died. Then Joab and his brother Abishai pursued Sheba the son of Bichri. Now one of Joab's young men stood by him and said, whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, follow Joab. But Amasa was wallowing in his own blood in the middle of the road, and when the man saw that all the people stood still, he removed Amasa from the road to the field and threw a garment over him when he saw that everyone who came by him stood still. Well, apparently Amasa did not know Joab very well. The historian Josephus thought that Joab let the dagger fall on the ground as if by accident, and then when he picked it up, he stabbed Amasa. Other people think that Joab had two swords, and he let one fall to the ground as a trick, and then used the other one to stab Amasa. Well, in Amasa's absence now, Joab and Abishai take off after Sheba, and one of the others there yelled for everyone who was for David to follow Joab. But Amasa was lying on the ground in his own blood, and people were stopping to look. So one of them drug him off the road and threw a garment over him. And then people didn't have to stop to see what was happening. So if we surround ourselves by the wrong kind of people or let them get away with stuff that they shouldn't get away with, they may accomplish some things for us, but they may also leave a trail of wreckage wherever they go, like Joab. In verses 13 to 22 then is a nice little paragraph, and we see the difference between Joab and a wise person, a woman from the town of Abel. And it says there in 13 to 22, as soon as he was removed from the road, all the men went on after Joab to pursue Sheba the son of Bichri. Now when he went on through all the tribes of Israel to Abel, that is Beth-maachah, and all the Berites, and they assembled and went after him as well. And they came and besieged him in Abel Beth-maachah. And they built an assault ramp against the city, and it stood against the outer rampart. And all the people who were with Joab were wreaking destruction in order to topple the wall. Then a wise woman called out from the city, listen, listen, please tell Joab, come here that I may speak with you. So he approached her, and the woman said, are you Joab? And he answered, I am. Then she said to him, listen to the words of your slave. And when he said, I am listening, and he said, I am listening, then she spoke, saying, in the past, they used to say, they will undoubtedly ask advice at Abel, and that is how they ended a dispute. I am one of those who are ready for peace and faithful in Israel. You are trying to destroy a city, even a mother in Israel. Why would you swallow up the inheritance of the Lord? Joab replied, far be it from me that I would consume or destroy. Such is not the case. But a man from the hill country of Ephraim, Sheba the son of Bichri by name, has raised his hand against King David. Only turn him over, and I will depart from the city. And the woman said to Joab, Behold, his head will be thrown to you over the wall. Then the woman wisely came to all the people, and they cut off the head of Sheba the son of Bichri, and threw it to Joab. So he blew the trumpet, and they were dispersed from the city, each to his own tent. Joab also returned to the king at Jerusalem. So Joab apparently knows only one way to proceed, and that is by violently attacking the opposition. And so he attacks the city of Abel and starts building a ramp to get over the wall. It doesn't say that he talked to the people first, but that he just attacked. And maybe he did try to talk, but it doesn't seem like that happened from the story. And if he had kept going, he would have broken in through the wall or gone over the wall and killed more and more people until he got to the person he was looking for, Sheba, the son of Bichri. But luckily for the people of Abel, there was a wise woman in the city, and she takes action to save the city. And commentators see 4 marks of her wisdom in action. First, she sees the problem, and then she acts to correct it. And third, she argues her case persuasively. And then fourth, she fulfills her responsibility. And she is a lot like Abigail in 1 Samuel 25, who keeps David from unnecessarily killing Nabal. And also the wise woman of Tekoa in 2 Samuel 14, who gets David to treat Absalom properly, better than David had been treating him. So the first thing the wise woman of Abel does is see the problem. Joab is attacking her city, and she doesn't know why. And so she acts to correct the problem by calling out to Joab so she can talk to him. And then she argues her case persuasively by saying that people have always come to her city for advice to end a dispute. And yet here is Joab trying to destroy that very city. In fact, the city is a mother in Israel, meaning that small towns in the area look to that city for help. She wants peace, and yet Joab is trying to swallow up the inheritance of the Lord. Well, that convinces Joab, and so he tells her that he is looking for Sheba, who has opposed King David. And she says, all right, don't worry. I will throw Sheba's head over the wall to you. And that's what she does. And Joab blows the trumpet to stop the battle, and he and the army return back to Jerusalem or to their homes. Now, wouldn't it have been nice if Joab would have talked to the woman or someone else beforehand, before attacking the city, to see if something could be worked out? And it's kind of like litigation. Some lawyers try to find a resolution before going to court, and others just go to court and then they have a scorched earth policy once they get there. Either way can be successful from a lawyer's point of view, and so it just depends on the lawyer. As a certain pastor I know says, he's not sure that lawyers can be Christians, but maybe they can be. Well, David got rid of the opposition so he could be restored as king and try to reunify the kingdom. And we may have to take strong actions ourselves to get rid of the opposition in our lives, the opposition that's keeping us from fellowship with God and with others. And we would do well to act like the wise woman of Abel and see the problem, then act to correct it, arguing our case persuasively, and then fulfill our responsibilities from that. Well, at the end of this chapter, we get a list of David's cabinet, sort of, so to speak, his cabinet, the people who are helping him rule the kingdom. And so it says there in 23 to 26. Now Joab was in command of the entire army of Israel, and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and Adoram was over the forced labor, and Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was secretary, and Shiva was scribe, and Zadok and Abiathar were priests. Ira, the Jairite, was a priest to David. Well, despite all that Joab has done, here he is back in command of the army. Now, the Kerethites and the Pelethites are foreigners, and they made up David's bodyguard. And that's interesting. I find that interesting that he would use foreigners as his bodyguards. And, you know, maybe it was a good choice. Probably he got associated with them when he was in exile from Saul, and so they have been with him for a long time, and so he trusts them. The forced labor were people who were forced to work on public projects without pay, and that was a common thing that happened in those days. And it sounds bad to us, but they probably were given a place to sleep at night and food to eat, and so maybe it was better than the alternatives, but it was still forced labor, and that's offensive. We have a secretary and a scribe. These are people who would help carry out what the king wanted, and they would write things down, keep a record of what things were said, what decisions David made. Perhaps they would interpret if there was a need to interpret something. Zadok and Abiathar continue as priests. They gave good service to David when he was on the run from Absalom. I'm wondering why there's a Jairite who is a priest to David. And the scholars think that he was a private chaplain and an advisor and not a priest of Israel. The word for priest, Kohen, can mean a Levitical priest, but it can mean other things as well, including an advisor. And back in 8:8, the word was used for David's sons. And so back then, they were probably trusted advisors to David. In fact, this list is similar to the one that's at the end of chapter 8, and that was probably earlier in David's reign. 2 Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel are not known for being chronologically arranged, so we can't think of everything as being in chronological order. But after chapter 8, it was probably at a high point in David's kingship. And now here we are at the end, closer to the end, and David has returned as king, but probably not to his previous glory from his point of view. And notice too that none of his sons are listed as advisors at this point. And of course, we will want and need advisors in our lives. We can have family members and friends. We have our pastors and elders and maybe others at church. There are doctors and lawyers and other professionals. We are not kings of Israel, but we do have our own little kingdom that God has given us, and we are responsible to be good stewards of what he has given us. And having advisors can help. So like David, we might, maybe will is a better word, we might make mistakes in our lives. We might commit adultery and end up divorced, or we might reconcile with our spouse, and that will take a toll on our family and other relationships. We might make poor financial decisions and end up perpetually broke or in bankruptcy. We might get a DUI and lose our driver's license for a while. We might discover that we have a child we didn't know about from a relationship that we had years ago. We might have raging political arguments with someone, and the relationship is now damaged. We might have had disagreements about how to approach a COVID-19 pandemic or something else, and the relationship gets damaged. Now, I've seen all those things from different people, and I might have been involved in a couple of them. Now, God is a good father, and so He's not going to let us get away with this kind of stuff. He'll discipline us like He did with David, but He will still be with us, and with His help and our wise decisions, we can make it back. We can make our way back to our lives. It may not be as glorious from a human point of view as it was before, but we will be chastened children who are a little bit closer to being like our big brother Jesus. And that's what it's all about from God's point of view. Excuse me. All right, well, let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll sign off. Father, thank you for disciplining us as children. It doesn't always feel good at the time, but if we stop and think about it, we know that you discipline us because you love us, and the things that you're disciplining us for are not really good for us to be doing. And so you're just helping us to avoid things that are bad for us and helping us become more like Jesus, which is our goal and your goal. So thank you for that. Pray that you will be with us during the discipline and not make the discipline too harsh. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. My other one never got going. Now, next week, I'll be back at Western Mennonite Church on the campus of Western Mennonite School, and now Western Christian School. So I'll be starting the sermon a little later. Church starts at about 10:30, and then I'll start the sermon after that. So I hope you'll tune in. If you're in the area, you could always drop by Western Mennonite Church there at Western Christian School. So that's next week. The following week, I have a little conflict, so I'm not sure I'll be able to pull off a sermon. I'll try, but don't be surprised if we miss it in 2 weeks. So, all right, well, have a great week. And if you're a football fan, hope you enjoy the Super Bowl. We don't watch a whole lot of football. Sometimes we do, but usually we'll watch the Super Bowl. And in fact, I'll be up watching it with my dad probably. So, all right, well, have a great week and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.